let's go ahead and talk about the racist irony of Asian fishing. So, before we talk about Asian fishing, we need to go ahead and talk about you know, the mother, the genesis of this idea of Asian fishing, and it all starts with catfishing. So, we need to be able to talk about catfishing. So, what exactly is catfishing? So, for those of you who didn't grow up in the MTV era, um, catfishing was popularized by the documentary, uh, which was posted in 2010. And catfishing basically um, is defined as the process of luring somebody into a relationship by means of creating a fictional online persona. So, if you notice, there's actually like 5 different components, okay? Whoops, where's the camera? Five. 5 different components, okay? So you have the process, okay? What is that process? What is the process that these people go through? Then you have the process of luring, right? You're trying to attract people. You're trying to elicit some sort of response. And over there, you can start asking questions of, well, how did they lure these people? How did they lure their audience? How did they lure their victims? But then they also lure them into a relationship. And that's when you start to ask, like, well, what are the terms of that relationship? What happens within that relationship? Who has power within that relationship? And then you were talking about the fictional aspect of that relationship, which is, leading to questions like, what is the nature of that deceit? Why is this fictitious? And then you have this question of, then you have the 5th section of online personas, because it's different from, like you can't catfish someone in real life. And so the online persona is a really important aspect, because you start to ask questions like, well, how does their online persona differ from their real persona? And what does that say about the relationship between this person's fake persona versus their actual persona? And so, like I was saying, the term catfishing originates from the 2010 documentary by Neve Schulman called Catfish. And basically, the point of the movie was that the director, Neve Schulman, was talking to this woman online who he thought was this person on the left. And this account had all these photos of this individual, and Neve thought, oh my God, she's beautiful. I want to be with her. And then he started to unveil that, like, okay, there's something fishy going on. This person doesn't seem like who they really are. And when they actually met, it turned out that the real person who was masquerading as the one on the left was actually the person on the right. And obviously, for people who've watched, you've seen that the documentary Catfish turned into a TV show on MTV called Catfish. And really, I mean, anyone can be catfished. You can be old, you can be young, you can be... Sorry, I'm like burping a lot. We had tacos earlier, so I'm like, in that little phase, so I apologize. But anyways, yeah, so anybody can really be targeted. It can be young people, old people, regular folks. It could be celebrities. And a lot of it is rooted in identity theft. And it's rooted in this idea of, like, internet relationship scams, internet financial scams. And so when you're talking about catfishing, you also have to talk about, well, why do people catfish? Why do people pretend to be somebody that they're not? And how has this sort of changed and shifted? Well, one, this has definitely been amplified through social media. Social media has allowed people to create online personas, and because there isn't this strict verification where you're like, Facebook is telling you, are you really this person? You have to put your social security, you have to put all your information, you have to drop a sample of your blood to prove that this is really you. And since you don't have those qualifications, people can just be whoever they want to be. And as social media has expanded, the opportunities to pose as a different person has only increased. And in terms of the reason why people do this, people do it for a number of reasons. Like when you actually watch Catfish, and you watch like the infamous part of every episode of Catfish, which is the moment when, you know, the hosts of Catfish are talking to the victim who is being led on to believe that this internet person is who they really are. And when they actually finally meet them, they actually knock on their front door, and the person opens the door, and you reveal, like, oh my God, you aren't who you said you are. That big moment, oftentimes you'll find out that the reason why they pretended to be somebody else is because they wanted to disassociate themselves from their day-to-day identity. They wanted to maybe hide from, the shame that they felt or the insecurity that they felt from being who they really are. They are trying to hide from certain moral obligations. They're trying to avoid certain social responsibilities and personal responsibilities. People who are trying to change how they feel on the inside by creating a representation, an idealized representation of themselves on the outside. The photo over here that Sierra is mentioning about Lil Bow Wow, the wild episode. This woman was talking to who she believed was Lil Bow Wow, like actually Lil Bow Wow, saying, "Oh, I want to marry you, I want to be with you," blah blah blah, and turned out to be the individual on the right. And I mean, you can see like all these different episodes of Catfish, and you see when they actually interview the person why, and they ask him what was the reason behind this? Like, why did you do it? And it always stems from this sense of shame or this sense of embarrassment and insecurity. Now, let's go ahead and talk real quick about blackfishing. This obviously isn't going to be the bulk of our conversation, since this in and of itself is a whole conversation that I can't fully talk on because there's just so much to touch base on. But I want to talk about it since it is, this idea sort of came before within, common discussions prior to Asian fishing. So, blackfishing. What exactly is blackfishing? So, blackfishing is the process of changing your features to imitate black people through a fictional persona that you create as a means to gain social status or to achieve certain brand opportunities. And in terms of some of the examples of the people who have been guilty of blackfishing, you have, the queen, the lord of blackfishing herself, Rachel Dolezal, who had, been telling people for, a majority of her career, who rose through the ranks of different, I believe, like nonprofit organizations, pretending to be this black woman who eventually got exposed. Then you also have people like Iggy Azalea. You have people like Emma Hallberg, and you just have a lot of different celebrities, a lot of women celebrities who are trying to pretend like they are black women. Now, what exactly is the harm of this? What happens when you have these white women and white people who are trying to be black? Well, these are white women who, fortunately for them, they can pick and choose the features that they want to represent to showcase their sort of ideal black woman, without having to actually live life as a black woman. So they'll never have to actually, they can adopt the hairstyle or the makeup or try to, mimic the look of their fashion or their body type to mimic black women. But they'll never actually experience life as a black woman. They'll never experience the discrimination in the workplace or at school or on job interviews. They'll never have to experience the negative associations that black women experience by having their natural hairstyles, by, even when we're talking about Sha'Carri Richardson, like the negative associations with having longer nails or having colored hair or having your body look like this or your skin look like that or speaking like this or like that. And so it's them being able to pick and choose the parts that they want while discarding the parts that they don't want. And their stolen identity, this stolen black identity, is a fashion accessory to them, and it makes them feel better because, for them, they are inheriting only the benefits of the specific idealized version of black women. So they are picking this, image of this mixed light-skinned queen, and they don't have to take into consideration all the other things that black women go through. And so it just completely diminishes and dehumanizes black women and black people's experiences to just, oh, well, you look like this. So if you look like this, and it must mean that your life is like this. And so the benefits that they are gaining is that it positions them within the marketplace as this spicy white person, this, this exoticized white person. And you'll see that these people are actually getting brand deals. They are getting appearances on TV shows. They are getting sponsorships. They are forming relationships on the basis of people thinking that they are this mixed exotic person. And it's all as a purpose towards developing their own personal brand. And they will be able to continue to benefit without ever having to experience any of the realities of what it actually means to be a black person. Now, on the discussion of Asian fishing, we got to ask ourselves, well, what is Asian fishing? Well, in a similar sense, if we're looking at sort of the definition of catfishing and we're applying race to that, then Asian fishing is the process of changing your features to imitate Asian people through a fictional persona as a way to gain social status or brand opportunities. The origins of like Asian fishing, it's hard to really pinpoint, because you can see that there have been tactics within Asian fishing that have been, in existence for a really long time. I can say that I've noticed this as early as like the mid 2000s of YouTube. I remember there was this YouTube creator named Maggie Bon, and Maggie Bon was this, a lot of people thought that Maggie Bon was like this, light-skinned Asian girl who would like look up at the camera, and she would always do this thing where she would be like this really cutesy face and this cutesy voice, and really just trying to speak Japanese, trying to look and act and trying to pretend that she is Japanese. And I remember thinking how weird it was that this random girl was, getting a lot of views over basically just staring at a camera and looking kawaii. And then you come to find out that this individual actually isn't even Asian. They are just a whole ass Midwestern white girl who is pretending to be Asian. And so I've noticed this, for quite some time. And I think as Asian media has become more popularized, more accepted, as Korean media has exploded throughout the world, as anime has become more normalized, you're starting to see the growth of Asian fishing, really as a whole entire subcategory. Now, some examples of some people who are notorious for Asian fishing. One of them would be Venus Angelic. So this is Venus Angelic on the left-hand side, dressed up as a living doll next to her mother. And Venus is a 24-year-old Swiss woman who started on YouTube when she was about 10 years old, way back in 2010. And so she's been on YouTube for over 10 years. And she started off her content just posting stuff like, how to be a living doll, how to dress cutesy and whatnot, how to do your makeup like this and that. And then it started to progress into how to learn Japanese and how to speak Japanese. And apparently it came out that this type of content of infantilizing herself was, apparently organized by her abusive mother. Her mother was telling her that she needs to dress like this and act like this as a way to, make a profit to help benefit her family. And apparently after that, she got married. She had divorced her husband. She had left her mom, and she had fled from her country to move to Japan. And when she moved to Japan, that's when you started to see a lot of her content also change. That's when some of her content was like, how to look like a Korean girl. Like, that's the actual title of her video: how to look like a Korean girl, how to look like a Japanese girl. And then she started to shift her content a little bit, where she is, posting, posting nude photos on OnlyFans, which I don't have a problem with people who, go on OnlyFans, or people who are in sex work. But the issue here is that she is a white woman trying to portray a very particular type of Asian woman, and she is using that as a vehicle to create this like really sexualized minor type of content. And you can see all throughout her Instagram and her YouTube page where she is like acting like a child. Like the image on the right hand where she's covering her mouth, the caption is, "Give me candy, please," with hearts and a baby bottle. Like, it's gross. It's gross. It's like, it's not kawaii. It's cringe. It's fucked up. And it's just, I get, and again, like, I know this is really complicated because we're also talking about how, the influence of how a lot of men will, support this content, and a lot of men will, gas her up and make her feel like, okay, this is actually good content. You should be posting this kind of stuff. But I think, again, it goes into the issue of what are these people doing when they are in Asian face? When they are Asian fishing, how are they behaving? And we'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, so it's like all throughout her YouTube page, you can see that there are these constant links between Asian culture, like very on the nose, underage, minor, pedophilic type of content, and very sexualized content. And all three of those things are really problematic in tandem, because again, you're talking about the history of Asian women who, you're talking about a group of people who have been subjected to historic human trafficking, historic sexual abuse and sexual colonization, and just this overall treatment of Asian women's bodies as if it's this, exotic playground for people to sort of explore themselves and to make themselves feel more masculine. And so there's a lot of problematic things just within this within the topic of Asian women and their sexual identities, and especially when it comes to, you have white people trying to, forge their own narratives and their own stories about what it means to be an Asian girl. You have a lot of problematic shit going on. So this is Venus Angelic, and she's just like one of many people who have, really like made a career off of Asian fishing. And then you have, of course, our headline act, Ollie London. Surprisingly, I'm not gonna actually like talk a whole lot about Ollie London, but there is quite a few interesting things. So on the left hand side, you have Ollie London's, OG face, the default skin. And Ollie was, came out onto the internet scene, talking about how they are a #1 fan of BTS and Park Ji-min, and that they are BTS's biggest fan. But after some time, they started to get a bunch of surgeries. Apparently, after 18 surgeries and an alleged $150,000 of investment in plastic surgery, the Ollie London on the left-hand side is now the Ollie son. Ollie, what was it? I forgot what are the honorifics in Korean. But yeah, I guess Ollie London is Korean now. Ollie identifies now as non-binary, as they, them, and they also identify as transracial. Because apparently that's a thing now. You can just grow up as a white person, so white that your name, so white that your name is London. You know, like, but you know, there's nothing more Korean than you know, a white person with the last name London. And so Ollie identifies. Oh, I forgot. I can't be problematic. I can't call them Ollie anymore. G-Min. I don't know if I can even do it with a straight face. G-Min. G-Min London. G-Min London. Whew. G-Min London is now, you know, co-opting this language of trans people, to try to make this case about being transracial, which is so fucked up because transracial is actually a term used by people who are adopted. Oftentimes you'll have cases like Korean people who are adopted by like white parents, white families, and so they are sort of classified as transracial because they have this sort of, I guess I need to sort of read up on the exact definition, but it's basically this idea of, you know, being Korean, but when you are in this adopted family, like your sense of identity is very, I don't want to say warped because I don't want to create that like negative connotation automatically, but there is a difference in the way that you're being, that your identity is constructed within this white family. And so yeah, G-Min London says, yeah, G-Min London posted this video where they're like, you know, post surgery, and they're just like, you know, showing a close up of their eyes, and he said, you know, I do look Korean now. I look Korean now, right? Because just a couple snips, and all of a sudden, you know, I guess that's all it takes to be Asian, right? And G-Min London was saying, you know, Korea, that's my home, that's my culture, this is my face, this is how I looked. And they were just talking about how, you know, for so long I felt trapped in this body. And again, these are, you know, sort of talking points that trans people will try to say. And you have G-Min London who is trying to co-opt that same language to justify this idea of being transracial. And I think it's really interesting because, you know, one of the things that G-Min London, I can't honestly keep calling Ollie G-Min. I just can't. Ollie, so one of the things Ollie's been doing, Ollie has been going on this like campaign against actual Asian people, because there are a lot of Asian people on YouTube who've written articles about Ollie, talking about how problematic this is, how much of an issue this is. And Ollie has been posting like, you know, a diss track talking about these Asian people, saying that, you know, they're jealous, they're just haters, they're not like real Koreans, which is just so bizarre. And then I started to dig a little bit further, and I learned that Ollie had a friend named Frenchie Morgan. And Frenchie Morgan is this like white woman Barbie, you know, like living Barbie, who got a lot of plastic surgery, and that is like, you know, her brand. Like she is like the plastic surgery Barbie kind of thing. And she was exposing Ollie, talking about how, you know, Ollie doesn't even like BTS, and that Ollie only really started to fuck with BTS as a way to gain enough public support to help pay for the surgeries that they wanted. And so Ollie actually lied, apparently, about paying $150,000 to make themselves look Korean, when in actuality, what's been happening is they have been getting these surgeries for free. They have been getting sponsored by different plastic surgeons to, you know, essentially build their perfect face, their idea of a perfect face. And Frenchie started to expose really how, like, you know, Ollie London makes it seem like they are this wealthy, you know, celebrity who is just like has this $150,000 to just drop on a whim to change their face, but actually Ollie comes from like a pretty, working class family, and Ollie has like a 2-bedroom apartment that Ollie shares with like 6 different people, and so it's like, the level of deceit goes way beyond just the face, but actually the whole entire lifestyle. And then I actually started to look into this even more because Ollie London, their Instagram profile was talking about their management company. I was like, their management company? What the fuck? Why? Interesting. Okay, so I looked it up. And they're managed by a company called Jitoni Productions. And Jitoni Productions is owned by Gina Rodriguez, who is a Los Angeles-based executive producer. And Gina Rodriguez has been working in entertainment since 1992. She currently works for Lifetime, for WeTV, and her client list is, it's pretty huge. But once I start naming off the clients, you'll start to understand a little bit more. Her client list is Nathan Dogface, the viral TikTok star who was skateboarding with the what is it? The cranberry juice. Listening to Fleetwood Mac. Gina also represents Mama June, Honey Boo Boo, Tessa Brown, aka the Gorilla Glue Girl. Gina represents Black China, Aaron Carter, Amber Rose, JWoww, Natalie Nunn. So you're starting to see a trend within the Jitoni Productions client list of all of these reality TV stars, these people who were famous for the sake of just being famous, people who are oftentimes, not to, diminish any of the work that some of these people have done, like legitimately, I know some of these people have they've worked on TV shows and whatnot, but this type of brand of the influencer, the reality TV star, and especially when it comes to someone like Ollie London, who's not really doing anything. Ollie isn't creating a TV show. Ollie isn't an actual singer. Ollie isn't a dancer. Ollie doesn't do anything. Ollie is just a celebrity for the sake of being a celebrity. And so you can see that is why, relative to the client list of this production company, you can definitely see that there is an incentive for a lot of these people within this brand to just monetize their image, monetize the fact that, oh, I am this interesting person that people want to know about because this thing happened to me. And again, I'm not inherently against it. I'm not inherently against the Gorilla Glue Girl from creating a platform on her own. I'm not against that. But especially when it comes to someone like Ollie London, who they are taking that platform and they're using that as a way to, talk shit about Asian people, that is when you start to have a problem. And again, this is an instance where when it comes to Asian fishing, it's you have people, you have white folks who are getting so butthurt about these accusations that they are Asian fishing that they are now out here and trying to accuse other Asian people of Asian fishing. Asian people can't have this makeup, they can't have this style because, you're trying to be Korean, you're trying to be Asian, but it's not even the same thing. Not even the same thing at all. At all. All right. So, we got to ask ourselves, what's going on? What is happening to these people? Why do they feel this way about themselves? Well, that's when we go into this discussion of the fact that it's not entirely about how these people look. And I think that's sometimes one of the issues that sometimes we get into when we look at these people and we see oh God, they change their face like this, they try to make their body like that. And, we talk about these very visible things because we see that on the surface. But I think an even bigger question is, how are they acting? How are they acting and behaving when they are in this persona that they have created and constructed. What are they able to do? So sort of going back on that whole catfish thing, like when that individual, that white lady, tried to pretend to be this other, pretty white lady, what was she trying to do? Well, she was trying to manipulate Neve into getting into a relationship. And so that is what is happening. And catfishing is its own thing, because you're talking about someone who is oftentimes victimizing an individual person. But in the case of like Asian fishing, blackfishing, this is something where it's like they're not necessarily trying to fool one specific person, but they are just they're fooling themselves. They're trying to fool other people. And so there's a lot more questions that we have to sort of ask ourselves. And so the first question that I'm sort of thinking about is, what does this costume, and I'm saying this, and I'm calling this a costume deliberately because you can take it off and you can take it on. I can't. This nose, these eyes, my hair, can't change this shit. This isn't a costume. And for a lot of people of color who have visibly ethnic features, like, that has always been the, sort of the trouble of growing to learn how to exist as a person of color, which is like learning how to deal with how you look and the fact that people, their beauty standards are totally opposite of how you look, and the fact that you have to deal with this, insecurity, the way that you have to deal with a lack of representation, the way that you have to deal with the ridicule and the bullying and the associations with people who have a nose like yours or eyes like yours or who have a body like yours. And so, I want to very specifically say that is why we are calling this a costume, because that's all it is. It is a fucking costume. And so again, what does this costume allow these white people to do? Well, for starters, it lets them step out of their whiteness. It lets them, avoid the reality of the situation, which is you are white, you have certain privileges while you are white, and there are certain aspects about being white. And by stepping out of that, by putting on this costume, they are able to cosplay as another race. In the case of Asian fishing, they are trying to embody this idealized, exotic Asian body, Asian aesthetic. And oftentimes they use this as a way to behave in a certain way, in either a sexualized way that they maybe aren't comfortable with when they are dressed as their normal selves. And as we've seen with Venus Angelic, you start to see that some people who actually adopt this, Asian aesthetic, who, engage in Asian fishing, use this as an opportunity to, express like very inappropriate, pedophilic type of content, and signaling this idea of like, oh, I'm underage, which is really disgusting. And, you have to start asking yourself, like, one, are they baiting older people with this pedo content, or are they trying to bait younger people into engaging with pedophilic behaviors? So either way, it's still really disturbing, and you really start to have to ask yourself, like, why are they so obsessed with acting childish? What is this obsession with, them being ooh-woo, and what are sort of the implications of that and what they're trying to say about Asian people? But also it's like, they do this as an attempt to stand out from the crowd, from other white people, to stand out, to be the different white person, to be the cool white person, to change their social status, because maybe within the realm of whiteness, they are relatively ugly, or they are seen as, undesirable, or they are seen as this or that. And then they have this belief that by, cosplaying, by putting on this costume of this Asian person or a black person, that somehow they can reorder their social status and then become, before I was just this average white person that nobody thought about, nobody cared about, but now I am a pale Asian goddess. And so, like I said, it allows them to step out of their whiteness. Now, how exactly does blackfishing and Asian fishing, how do these things change the perceptions of people of color? Well, One thing is it definitely reinforces the ideas of ideal Asian or Black beauty. Because when you're talking about people like Ollie London, when you're talking about people like Rachel Dolezal, there's a reason why they choose to look the way that they do. There's a reason why they aren't there's a reason why Ollie London isn't trying to look Filipino. There's a reason why Rachel Dolezal, isn't trying to adopt all these other aspects about being a Black woman. And again, it's like they get to pick and choose the parts that they like. But then you also have to ask a question: what do they not like about these other things? What is wrong with those other things? What is wrong with these other features? And again, it's just reinforcing what physical features are considered to be Asian, because in their eyes, they consider Ollie London feels like, okay, well, all I had to do was get eye surgery, and now I'm Asian. And so there are certain key markers that you can learn about when it comes to what they think the ideal Asian person looks like. So for them, they think that an Asian person has pale skin, a thin nose, or a switch between either big anime eyes or slanted eyes. And it's the same way that they portray Black women as all having the same type of body, as all having the same type of hair texture or skin color or mannerisms or fashion style. And then again, it just further perpetuates colorism. It further perpetuates body dysmorphia. It further perpetuates toxic body image, and it further perpetuates self-hatred within communities of color who are still dealing with this shit. And again, it's not even taking into consideration the fact that the Asian people who do get the surgery to look like the idealized version of their Asian selves, like that in and of itself is a discussion that is really infinitely complex, and they're sort of just inserting themselves without really knowing the implications. And then we go into being ethnic makes me feel like myself. Oh yeah. So a lot of these folks, it's worth asking, what are they feeling when they play as an Asian person that they don't get to feel when they are seen as white? Because oftentimes what you'll notice is that these people will treat Asianness or Blackness as sort of this blank canvas to express parts of their behavior that they know aren't accepted if they are seen as white. So for the people who are trying to be Asian, maybe they want to get into the whole uwu thing. Maybe they want to express their love for anime or their love for a certain type of makeup or fashion style. And so again, it's like you're asking these questions about, it's not just the fact that they're trying to look this way, but what are they doing when they act this way? What doors are being opened? In the photo behind us, or in the photo over here, this is Jess Krug on the right-hand side. But Jess Krug wanted to be known as Latina, so Jess Krug changed her name to Jess La Bombera. And so she took that opportunity to grow within nonprofit organizations, I believe, and to rise through the ranks, moonlighting as a Latina person, getting opportunities that were specifically for Latina people, and then, again, being a whole ass white person. Let me go read a couple of comments really quick. Neela says, I just hate how blackfishing and Asian fishing seem to have arisen while transgender people are becoming more visible, because people don't see anything wrong with this and will argue, if people can choose their gender, why can't people choose their race? Oh, yeah. I mean, some of the biggest responses about Ollie London have been coming from conservatives who are trying to dunk on trans people by saying, oh, well, if you identify as trans, then you have to accept the fact that Ollie London is Korean. Ollie's Korean now. And I mean, I'm making the voice of Ben Shapiro because that's where I listen to this bullshit from. But Ben Shapiro is just one of many of these conservatives who've been saying this shit. And you're absolutely right. And this is one of the most fucked up aspects of this whole aspect of Asian fishing and blackfishing, which is the co-opting of language used specifically for trans people to explain their experiences. And now it's diminishing it. And now it's sort of trivializing the idea of transitioning as, oh, well, I can transition to a fish. I can transition to a different ethnicity. It's like, even the topic of transitioning is in and of itself really complicated. And a lot of people, including myself, I'm just not super sophisticated in being able to talk about it. And so things like this just complicate the waters even more and make it more difficult for people who are trans, who are just trying to be seen as human, who are trying to just be treated as human. Sunshine says, the black scent on Billy and so many others is so disrespectful. Salt on the wound of the fishing costume. I haven't seen it with Asian fish because, yes, those will usually play babies, subservient dolls. Blackfishing will use the costume to be aggressive. Yeah, and you'll see that how, like, sometimes these white girls will try to assume that, okay, well, I can adopt these aesthetics and mannerisms, and by doing so, I can tap into this, assertive, strong black woman type of caricature that they've sort of built up. And yeah, it's, like I said, it's really interesting to see, like once they put on the costume, what are they doing? What do they think they now can do that they weren't able to do when they didn't have the costume on? Cheryl says, in late 2019 into 2020, there was a rash of white women who were outed as black in Asian fishing, mostly in academia, and it was truly gross given how they were using that persona to position themselves as these black or Asian studies experts, getting prestigious jobs. Oh my God, like that totally reminds me of how, like, there's also an issue of, there was this case of a poetry contest for Asian Americans or Asian writers, right? And the person who won was actually revealed to be a white guy who created a Chinese pen name, and they wanted to win. They wanted to win like the scholarship or the award or whatever. So yeah, this is a pretty damn pervasive problem. Amanda says, for years, society has been making fun of Asian eyes, but when a white person does it for Asian fishing or fashion, such as fox eyes, it's so amazing to the world. And Sunshine says, when they are not getting enough victim pity, they change it up. Kind of like how Grimes got alien scar tattoos. Can't be the victim in planet Earth anymore. Gotta go to Mars. Neil says, conservatives just see everything in terms of fairness. Oh, 100%. Like, always just thinking like, oh, well, if we're giving money to unemployed people, how come we're helping the billionaires? Like, oh God, cringe. So, going on with the idea of how being ethnic makes these white people feel about themselves. Again, we're talking about how these people can turn off their aesthetics on and off. Unlike us, people of color, you can't. You can't turn off your nose. Can't turn off the fact that you have slanted eyes. It is what it is. And so again, it allows them to take advantage of the benefits of these Asian or black beauty standards while avoiding the lived experiences of people of color. So whether you're talking about Ollie London, whether you're talking about Maggie Bun, whether you're talking about Venus Angelic, they will never... Hey, you good? They will never have to experience anti-Asian racism for their Asian eyes or their Asian face. Nobody is going to be marginalizing Ollie London or Venus Angelic on the basis of them looking Asian. They will continue to attribute their social awkwardness, their mental health issues, the fact that, oh, society bullies me, as further justification for why they need to be in costume in the first place. They aren't expected to stand up for our community. When they are dressing up as Asian or black, they aren't expected and held to the same standards that we are. And again, they don't have to deal, like I said, they don't have to deal with any of the actual lived experiences of being us. And on top of this, what I think is really ironic is that all the people who try oftentimes all the people who try to moonlight as a different ethnicity, they aren't even willing to call out the problems within the culture. They aren't even willing to call out white supremacy. And so it's like, if you are trying to, pretend to be like you're part of our team, at least act like it. At least pretend like you care about the shit that we care about. But instead of actually, taking advantage of the fact that they are white and that they do have the privilege to actually talk about white culture, criticize white culture, criticize white institutions and white people, they have that ability, and yet instead they want to feign any type of responsibility, and instead they want to take a ideological retreat into Asian culture or into Black culture. Okie dokie. Now let's talk about designing the perfect Asian face. So we got to ask ourselves, why do these people choose those specific features? All right? Why these specific ones? Why the pointy chin? Why all these different things? So some of the common themes are like pale skin, this idea of like Korean glass skin, subscribing to Asian beauty standards, this idea of being very pale, being very youthful, having this idea of like a natural pale, natural beauty, which all is sort of, very indiscreetly saying a very big message, which is, you are more beautiful if you are naturally pale. If you naturally have this complexion, you are more beautiful. They also have the use of the whole fox eyes, the attempt at creating these Asian eyes. So whether they do this through surgery, whether they do this through makeup, whether they tape their eyes, whatever it is, they try to make their eyes look more slanted. And then there's this idea of what I call the magical Asian eyes. And I call it the magical Asian eyes because, I just find it so weird that, depending on who it is, if you're comparing this individual, this Brazilian dude who wanted to look like a K-pop star, when you compare his eyes and Ollie London's eyes to, say, for example, Venus Angelic's eyes, who is trying to do the whole big eye anime thing, there is this weird pick and choose between people who want to look Asian and they go for the anime aesthetic, or people who want to look Asian so they go for the Asian celebrity aesthetic. So sometimes the eyes are slanted and sometimes the eyes are big, but either way they're all trying to portray this idealized image of what they think beautiful Asian people are supposed to look like. And so that again goes into the discussion of what are these people, by choosing these things, by choosing to, oftentimes you'll see cases of white people who are already pale trying to look even more pale, or trying to change the tone of their skin. So maybe they might have red undertones, but they want to have more golden undertones to look more Asian or whatever. And you'll see a complete change in skin tones. And as far as what they're trying to say and what they essentially are communicating, again, are who they think ideal Asian beauty standards represent. So they're essentially saying that Asian women are thin, Asian women are pale, Asian women have straight hair, Asian women are very young looking, Asian women are ultra feminine, Asian women are childish, they have ooh-woo personalities, they are innocent, they are submissive, they are overly sexual. And then for Asian men, they're trying to say that Asian men are thin, that they are pale, that they have straight hair, that they are very boyish, that they are fashionable. And so there are a lot of different things that they are trying to say about Asian people from this. And oftentimes when you're looking at who this description fits, the thin, the pale, the overly sexual, you start to see who this advantages and who doesn't. And the fact that people like South Asians and Southeast Asians who are more tan, who have more textured skin, who have wider noses, who have different shaped eyes, showing how they don't fit this standard. And when you also look into the conversations about how even East Asians feel about darker skinned Asians, you start to see that a lot of the racism that is exhibited in Asian fishing mirrors the type of discrimination and racism that East Asians have towards South and Southeast Asians. And then we will, oops, I totally forgot to, oh my God, I totally forgot to write my little points. Oh shit. I can't believe I forgot to put my images here. Well, fuck it. We're going to talk about it anyways. So, there is this question about what about Asian people with these white faces, all right? Well, what about Asian people who get plastic surgery and they want to look like they're white people? Well, when it comes to Asian people who want to look white, I think we have to understand the very different landscape that is happening between white people who want to look Asian and black versus Asian people who want to look white. One, plastic surgery, again, is rampant among Asian people. There is this concept of Asian plastic surgery, this idea of taking ethnic features and eliminating them. So if you have a wider nose, giving yourself a thin nose. If you have darker skin, going through surgery to lighten your skin, using papaya soap, whatever it is, to make yourself look more white. Giving yourself double eyelid surgery, giving yourself colored blue, green, purple eyes, whatever. And so there is definitely a trend and a history of Asian people who want to look this way. But when it comes to why they want to look this way, it's a very different reason. Because you're talking about, like, when white people want to look Asian or black, they are not being denied opportunities within their lives that are only afforded if they look black and Asian. But Asian people and black folks and people of color do. There are so many times where it's like, whether you want to talk about black women who are being pressured and forced to wear their hair a particular way so it looks professional in the workplace, or whether or not you have Asian people who are trying to get into the entertainment industry, but they are told that, by casting directors, that they will never get a job unless they get like a nose job, or that, the way that their eyes look is a problem. Whether you're talking about Asian models who won't get hired for runway shows because they don't have the right look. And so there are so many different places and so many different industries and avenues where people of color, because of how they look, has a direct impact on how they are being treated. And so there is a direct incentive to change your face, because changing your face might mean getting better job opportunities. Changing your face might be getting better treatment in school. Changing your face and changing your look might mean getting more respect within your own community. And so there are so many more issues when it comes to people of color who are trying to look white. I mean, even if you want to talk about the life and the history of Michael Jackson and why he decided to get plastic surgery, there's so much more meat on that bone and so much more commentary than just, it's because he liked the aesthetic. Condon says, or even names. White-sounding names are more likely to get the job interview, but may not get the job once they see the face. Yeah, I mean, that's another huge thing. Like, you're even talking about Asian people who have had to, adopt these Americanized names because nobody wants to, have the decency to actually learn how to pronounce our names. And so you have a very different landscape between people of color who are being pressured to look white versus white people who just want to cosplay as people of color. And again, when we're talking about this idea of Asian people who want to look white, and we sort of have to ask ourselves, well, why does that happen? Why, like, where does this stem from? Oh my God, I totally forgot this one too. I am so sorry, everybody. That goes into our next conversation, which is about anti-Asian propaganda. Because when we're talking about how Asian people get pressured into wanting to look more white, and just the overall discussion of, what Asian people are supposed to look like, we have to talk about anti-Asian propaganda. Because throughout the history of racist propaganda, there have been so many instances where white people have tried to dictate what they think Asian people are look like, or they go into Asian faces through yellowface as a way to try to tell the story of Asian people from the perspective of Asian people. And so, there is a very long and very racist legacy of white people warping Asian faces, trying to tell stories about who they think we are, how we act, how we behave, and what it means about us as an entire community. And this is a photo from Breakfast at Tiffany's, the infamous Mr. Yuni Yoshi, who is a white actor dressed up as an Asian man, and specifically a Japanese man. And so, whether you're talking about anti-Asian cartoons during the late 1800s and the early 1900s that were depicting Asian people as, rats, like literal rats, as octopi, as absolute monsters, whether you're talking about that form of media misrepresentation, whether you're talking about the misrepresentation of Japanese people during World War II, during World War II propaganda, whether you're talking about the misrepresentation of Asian people through yellowface, like in the portrayals of these different movies, whether you're talking about the blatant racism and misrepresentation of characters like Fu Manchu, whether you're talking about the misrepresentation of Asian faces through anti-communist Red Scare type of media, there's just so many cases of white people using media as a way to try to say, oh, look, Asian people, they're so backwards. Oh, they're so odd. They eat dogs. They do this and that. And so there's just so much history of white people trying to tell other people and trying to tell Asian people what it means to be Asian. And that goes into another discussion of whitewashed Asians in media. So now you have, so again, we're starting off this discussion of Asian representation, where when Asian people came to the United States, the form of representation that was there was anti-Asian cartoons, anti-Asian propaganda, anti-Chinese exclusion type of media. All right, and this persisted for decades. Anti-Asian racism in media still exists today. And so throughout history, this has been a problem. Whether you're talking about, again, these old cartoons, or whether you're talking about, The Chosen One, played by Tilda Swinton, Yellowface's impact on demonizing Asian features has always been an attempt to highlight white people. So what I'm trying to say is, throughout these old movies, the reason why they depicted Asian people as barbarians, as people who were rat eaters, dog eaters, people who were uncivilized, they did that as a way to make a commentary about what white people were. So by saying that Asian people are this, they were automatically drawing conclusions that, okay, well, if white people and Asian people are totally not the same, and if Asian people are the rat eaters and the dog eaters and the uncivilized rats and the foreigners, by extension, by default, that means that white people are the opposite. White people are not foreigners. White people are civilized. White people eat normal people food. And so there's so many of these sort of juxtapositions of what they are trying to say Asian people are and what Asian people act like, and how that has a reflection on how white people are. And the history of whitewashing in media has impacted so many different Asians in so many different categories of media. It's impacted comic books and movies. It impacted Bruce Lee when he wanted, when there was talks about making a TV show called Kung Fu, and it was supposed to be about a story that Bruce Lee had written and wanted to develop, but instead they gave that to David Carradine, who was a white man. It happened in Dragon Ball Z. It happened in Ghost in the Shell. It happened with Emma Stone, who wanted to play as a native Hawaiian person. And so this pattern of mistreatment in the media, again, you're starting off with misrepresentation in anti-Asian propaganda, then you're whitewashing them in the media. So it's like over the course of, almost like a whole ass century, you're just not giving Asian people any autonomy to really be able to craft their own stories. And you were dominating the narrative by putting your people in yellowface and having them tell Asian stories, by blocking out Asian people from telling their stories and letting them participate. And so you're having a very warped perspective of like, what is Asian culture? Who are Asian people? What is Asian culture? All right, the power of media influence. So how exactly does media impact beauty standards and body image? Well, in a number of ways. Throughout history and across different cultures, we know that media has influenced public and personal opinions on body image to a huge degree. There are a lot of positive messages that are associated with attractiveness, and there are a lot of negative associations with unattractiveness. So you have to keep that in mind, right? That throughout media history, that has always been the conclusion. Attractiveness is a positive thing. Unattractiveness is a negative thing, all right? And when it comes to, this type of media and how it is influencing people, it's not about, again, it's not just about how these people look. It's not just about the fact that the people on the magazines are thin and they have washboard abs or big bulging biceps. It's not entirely about that. It's also about what they are doing as this washboard abs type of model. What are they doing as this beautiful, perfect face, hottest 100 type of person? What are we saying about that? What is the handsome character on the TV show doing? What is the fate of the ugly characters? What are they doing? Who is the focus of this movie? Are we focusing the movie and making the main character the unattractive person, or are they the villain? Is the attractive person the main hero, or are they the villain? Who gets to have happy endings in a TV series or a comic book movie? Is it the ugly person, or is it the attractive person? And so media is constantly telling us who is deserving of respect, who is deserving of love, who is deserving of political representation, who is deserving of moral support. And these things impact people regardless of race, of gender, of income level. When it comes to gender beauty standards, for women, there's constant pressures to be thin, to have your curviness look like this, to act submissive. For men, there's pressure to be muscular, to be super tall, to be very dominant. And you can see this media influence everywhere. Movies, TV shows, comic books, YouTubers, social media accounts. This happens whether that media is scripted or unscripted. And, the interesting thing about this is that standards can change and standards can be influenced. And then that goes into the impact of anime on body image, because this is another thing that I think is worth talking about. Because animated media, sometimes we sort of downplay it because we think, okay, well, the only thing that really matters is, real people. Oh, okay, because no one, people want to look like real people. People want to look like, Chris, one of the Chris's, one of the Marvel Chris's, or whoever, like whoever your beauty standard is. We oftentimes want to look like these people who exist in real life. But we oftentimes forget that animated media does have an impact on body image and behavior. And in particular, kawaii culture, sort of this cute culture, is definitely part of an industry. It's part of an industry that uses cuteness as a form of brand positioning, aka there is a profit motive behind making things cute. It's not just about making things cute for the sake of making things cute. It's the sake of making things cute so you can sell things. It's the sake of making things cute so you can promote something. And it's important that we understand that Japan's view on kawaii culture and the influence of kawaii culture has a huge impact when it comes to Japanese society and how Japanese society treats and expects certain things of women. So whether you're talking about kawaii culture infantilizing Japanese women, limiting their perceived qualifications, and validating their credibility when it comes to leadership, or just not taking them seriously. A lot of these things are problems that like real Japanese women have to experience. And this is one of those things where it's like, again, Venus Angelic is not going to have to deal with this the same way that Japanese and Asian women have to deal with. They're not going to have to deal with this idea that, okay, well, because you're a Japanese woman, this is your role in society. You have to act like this. You have to get married at this age. You have to have kids at this age. And so, the inherent problem with kawaii culture is that it's oftentimes associated with youth and beauty and age and innocence. And by establishing kawaii culture as like inherently good, as inherently positive, regardless if you agree or not, there are a lot of women who are then pressured to feel like, okay, well, if I mimic this whole kawaii culture, then I will be rewarded by receiving more opportunities, more respect from men. And again, that is why it's so fucked up, because you're already having so many Japanese women activists who are talking about how kawaii culture affects them, how gender discrimination in the workplace is rampant in their culture. And yet then you have these white girls who are just completely fine cosplaying as Japanese women, thinking that all it takes to be Japanese is, cat girl ears and fox eye makeup. All right, let me go into this last one, and then I'll go read some comments. All right, the impact of K-pop on beauty standards. So when it comes to Korean media is similar to the influence of Japanese media on Japanese people. Korean media has a huge impact on Japanese people. Korean media has a huge impact on Korean people. Who gets to be featured in Korean media has a huge impact on Korean beauty standards. And, who becomes the next idol, who gets represented in the news, who is deemed worthy of respect, oftentimes will align with those beauty standards. So the pale people, the thin people, the people with a face like this or eyes like that will get most of that visibility. And this favorable treatment of beautiful people starts to send a message to other Korean people, which is that if you fit these standards, if you fit these social standards, these beauty standards, then you will be able to climb the social ladder. You deserve this promotion. You deserve to be an idol. You deserve this praise. But if you don't, then you don't deserve it. Then you don't deserve this happiness. Then you don't deserve this respect. And Korea's obsession with plastic surgery, unfortunately, it matches their country's relationship with classism. The perception of those who are lower income, it impacts them, because these beauty standards start to communicate to them that, hey, you might be the ugly Korean, but if you change up your face, if you get plastic surgery, this will be the jet fuel that will allow you to gain social mobility. That will, it will give you this opportunity to, get the job, get the girl, become the most popular person in school. And so, Korean pop culture isn't necessarily like inherent, like Korean pop music isn't inherently problematic. It's not inherently problematic to be a Korean person making popular music, But it is problematic when the standards that are set by the $5 billion K-pop industry starts to have a negative impact on how actual Korean people feel about themselves. When it starts to have a negative impact on Koreans who don't fit those beauty standards. Because there are also plenty of stories about how Koreans experience a lot of bullying and mistreatment in their social circles or in the workplace. And the fact that so many of them feel like they are unworthy of love, they are unworthy of their own self-respect until they fix their nose, fix their face, fix their eyes. And, you know, K-pop has had a really huge impact on other industries. So K-pop isn't just music, you know, it also has a huge overlap with the beauty industry. It has a huge overlap with the film and TV industry. It has huge overlap with international affairs and even politics. Oops. And yeah, so I mean, there's also this impact of K-pop on other Asian people. So, you know, you can ask the question of like, well, what happens when the same strict pop culture beauty standards get ported over to non-Koreans? Like, what happens when these K-beauty standards are being subjected onto Thai people or Indian people or Filipino people? Because then you have this sense of Korean superiority and non-Korean Asian inferiority, where there's this racist assumption of there being lower class versus higher class Asians. There are jungle Asians versus fancy Asians. And so you have so many different issues that are packaged into this, whether it's the colorism, whether it's the racism, whether it is like toxic, you know, nationalism. So there's a lot going on here in terms of how some of these different beauty standards affect other Asian people. All right, before we go into changing beauty standards, let's go ahead and read some comments. Got a lot of here. Carlene says, the U.S. military, they said Americans can't trust you with little eyes, but if you make your eyes bigger, then we can see your eyes and trust you. Yep. I remember reading some anti-war propaganda talking about that. There's... I need to find the post, but there was like this one post that I had made a couple years ago talking about how I found a document that was specifically showing a Korean face before and after plastic surgery. And the caption at the bottom was saying how, oh, well, if you look at the Korean person now, they look like this. But once they have the surgery, they look more trustworthy, they look more friendly, they look like they're more able to assimilate. And so there is a very direct correlation between like pressuring people of color to literally change their face, to go under the knife, and to fix or improve their faces as a way to get better respect, better treatment, or to just be treated like a human. Damon says, that scene was in Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. It was when Linda first saw the propaganda herself. Kunan says, yeah, Fu Manchu, Apu, Miyagi, fake guru tropes. Gregory Taylor says, fuck the media. I cannot care less for other people's standards, and I wish other people felt the same. Kunan says, yeah, dark-skinned characters are cast as evil in fantasy series, often for example, and they are even called as the Dark One on top of it. Oh, yeah, I mean, like, like there's that controversy of Street Fighter, and Street Fighter having, you know, Dark Ken, and Dark Ken, or Evil Ken, or whatever. And how, you know, Ken, the evil version, is like dark skin. So yeah, that is a huge thing. Neil says, yes, I learned that part of the reason why kawaii culture came about was a way for Japan to rebrand their image from being violent imperialists. Yeah, that's a really interesting discussion, because there's a lot of things to be said about that. I mean, on one hand, it really was an attempt to sort of change the brand image as being more friendly, and that's oftentimes why you'll see the existence of, you know, Japanese media where their primary media, characters that they develop are like white people. Like whether you're talking about anime, whether you're talking about early Japanese cartoons, whether you're talking about Japanese video games where the characters are all white people. There is the discussion of how Japan specifically sort of branded themselves as a way to lift themselves up from the results of World War II, and their attempt at trying to create a entertainment economy based off of anime, based off of this sort of like, weird culture, robots and giant anime characters, that type of culture. They use that as a way to sort of dig themselves out of what happened in World War II. So, it's really interesting. It's not to say that like all people who engaged in kawaii culture are automatically violent imperialists, because it's like, if you're an anime artist, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a violent imperialist. But I think it is interesting to think about how kawaii culture as an entire system feeds into Japan's overall political goals. Kunden says, with at least 2 YouTube videos at over 1 billion views, K-pop does have big impact and influence. Massive influence. Massive influence. I mean, the fact that we have, a BTS meal at McDonald's, you can order that in the United States, a BTS meal. That's unbelievable. That is unbelievable in terms of talking about the scope and the scale of influence of K-pop. Pam says, regarding David Carradine, at the height of his kung fu era, he was cast as singer Woody Guthrie in the biopic Bound for Glory, 1976. The Dust Bowl scenes were filmed the next street over from my house. A Chinoy family who was into karate wanted to meet him. Long story short, he was rude to the karate kiddos. Ooh, damn. David Carradine. Well, when was it that he died? I forgot when. But, yeah. All right. Going on to some of our last discussion points. Let's go ahead and talk about changing beauty standards. So, let's talk about the influence of early POC beauty standards on white Europeans. So, if we want to go ahead and talk about this, we need to talk about the fact that colonization and white supremacy requires the constant proof of European superiority to justify its crimes against non-European people. And so what I mean is, when you're talking about white supremacy and colonization, there is just this consistent push, whether it's in their artwork or in their politics or in their religion, a constant push to always be elevating white people above people of color. And this is especially true when it comes to physical appearances. So when it comes to media representation and just discussions of race early on, some of the earliest depictions of Black, Indigenous, Latino, and Asian people, Asian aesthetics, Asian beauty standards, were viewed as antithetical to white beauty standards. In other words, whenever they would try to, like in this picture over here, whenever race scientists and eugenicists would try to talk about, this is what Asian people look like, this is what Black people look like, this is what white people look like. Whenever they would do that, they would always be pushing this, super idealized image of a white person. Every white man, every white person in these diagrams would look, fresh face, a fresh hair, head of haircut, whereas the people of color in these images oftentimes would look disheveled. They would have they didn't show the diversity within these ethnic faces. And there was always an attempt to say, oh, well, Asian people, they look like this, and this is a negative thing because in contrast, white people have better noses, or Black people's skin is like this. and that's actually bad because white skin can do this instead. And so there was always a positioning. There was always a reason for that positioning. And so through this positioning, they were able to say that, okay, this is what Asian people look like. Their eyes are slanted. They are too small. These eyes are too small. These indigenous Australian people, well, their skin is too dark. Oh, these indigenous African people, well, their noses are too wide. Whereas what I call sort of the Goldilocks effect of race, where white people try to position all other people of color around them as the extremities, as black people being the extreme side of one side, Asian people being on another side of an extreme, and then white people can sort of situate themselves as the Goldilocks, as the middle ground, as the, I'm not too dark, I'm not too light, my hair isn't too textured, my hair isn't too straight, my eyes aren't too slanted. And so it just conveniently allows them to depict themselves as the beauty standard. And so, the portrayal of these physical differences between people of color and white beauty standards oftentimes resulted in white people's desire to spread this counter narrative of physiognomy. And if you're not familiar with physiognomy, I've talked about it during our Blood Lies series. And basically, physiognomy is the pseudoscientific, keep that in mind, the pseudoscientific practice of evaluating and assessing somebody's character, their personality, their human worth, based on their physical features. And so you'll see that the history of physiognomy and race science is one of white supremacists constantly saying that, black people have heads shaped like this because their brains are smaller. Oh, Asian people, their bodies are like this because they are genetically inferior. And so there are just so many of these cases where race scientists were constantly trying to explain why people of color looked the way that they did, and they always would liken it to either some sort of physical abnormality, either a lack of evolution, like literally calling people of color, pre-evolutionary humans, thinking that white people were the pinnacle of evolution. So again, this has a huge, huge, huge history, and we need to be able to understand that influence. Now we got to talk about how white people got bored of whiteness. So, interestingly enough, when it comes to media representation, a lot of racists were very narrow-sighted in that sense, because they were always trying to push white people on the forefront of media and movies and TV shows, and the top 50 hottest people in America list. White people have been trying to dominate these social spaces. And I think over time, the oversaturation of white beauty standards of the same nose, the same face shape, the same skin color, like the same shit all the time, that oversaturation of white beauty standards created a need for something different. And so instead of highlighting people of color and their beauty as equally important and as valid as white beauty standards, instead, white supremacists and white culture wanted to try and discover other white people who could resemble those facial features of ethnic people, but in a white body. So it's sort of similar to the way that the music industry invested so heavily in the white version of so many other different types of music genres created by black musicians. So instead of showing, undying love for black rock and roll artists, they propped up Elvis. Instead of highlighting black boy and girl bands, the music industry propped up Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. And so the problem is that there's more to black and Asian indigenous culture than just our faces, but based off of what these white people are doing, all they care about is how we look. And all they care about are the versions of us who they think subscribe to their particular version of their beauty standards. And that goes into cultural appropriation as a way to escape. So, white people in general, I think, struggle with their identity. And I think white people who do really struggle with their identity and who don't fit in within traditional white beauty standards oftentimes will want an escape. And instead of, confronting their own body image or their own cultural identities and how those things have been, shaped and influenced by media, instead, they would rather avoid that personal responsibility and that reflection, and they want to use cultural appropriation as a way to dress, as a way to escape, as a way to put on a costume and be somebody else. Again, asking the question of, what do people do? What do these white people do when they are dressing up as us? What do they think they can do now that they dress up as us? And so being in a different race momentarily will allow them to step out of their bodies, their lives, their responsibilities, and the beauty standards that probably originally made them feel like shit. And so, you have a lot of cases where people who are blackfishing and Asian fishing do so because they have unresolved problems with their own white identities. And instead of tackling those things and unpacking those problems, they'd rather just hide in an Asian face. And so, the privilege of white people who culturally appropriate is one that allows them to avoid the negatives of being white and POC beauty standards, while also taking in only the good parts. So they can mimic our eyes, our bodies, our skin, but they will never get bullied for having those features in the first place. All these white folks see within Korean media or black entertainment are just ethnic faces and just a list of features that they think look kind of cool on that person who they might want to try it on themselves. That's all you see. They just see these features. They don't see the people or the experiences or the culture behind that. They don't see the life that is required to live in order to have that type of skin, in order to look like that. All right. Let's see what they say here. I'm going to read some comments. We are going on to the next section over here. Melissa Taylor says, that is so, wow, used. Laughing my ass off. I remember when BTS first debuted like in 2012, and they were not at all popular. The influence they have had in just a few recent years still blows my mind. I saw this says, I'm sorry, white people need lots of light and makeup on their skin to look good. When you walk on the street, most of them do not look like the ones chosen for fashion magazines or ads. Oh no. Shauna says, just like the Olympic Committee saying swim caps for people with big hair, black women doesn't follow the natural shape of the head. Yeah. That's, those are the experiences that these people who are Asian fishing and black fishing will never be able to understand. And I think that's what makes so many people of color frustrated, is that you can't just take in the good parts of what you think this identity is about. You can't. Melissa says, I know this is not the same person, but how do three of these people have almost identical smiles? Chris says, wait, was that Cheyenne Jackson in the second picture from the left? I thought he's Native American, or was he shown with them since it's about how he fits their narrative? I'm not sure. I have to go ahead and check. Was it this one? The one on the left? I don't know. Pam says, I see this cultural appropriation in my neighborhood. There is a white lesbian bar owner who named her Biz May Wa Beer Room. She flighted from Oakland. That tells me all I need to know. All right. So let's go on to these last two sections over here. We're almost finished. what is going on with white identity? So first off, I want to go talk about the nature of white culture. I think it's important to know that European American colonists needed to create this shared identity when they first came to the United States as a way to distinguish their interests in relation to the interests of indigenous Americans and the African people that they enslaved. And so when you have this hodgepodge of Europeans from all over Europe, all these different types of colonizers, they wanted to create this sort of singular identity that they can sort of connect with. And that is where white identity came from. The nature of being white is the nature of considering yourself as blank canvas. And you consider yourself this blank canvas as a method for social climbing. So in these contexts, whiteness is all about the fact that, your past doesn't guide you. Your whiteness isn't a privilege and it's not a burden. Your class is limitless. It doesn't matter, if you're rich or you're poor. Being white means that you can do whatever you want. You can achieve anything that you want, and that your future is shaped by the actions that you do right now. And profit and power and success are unlimited. And once you have it in your control, you can do whatever it is that you want. And that really is the nature of whiteness. Whiteness is fluid. Anyone can technically be white or be removed from the white category, depending on the situation. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people forget about whiteness and white identity. The fluidity of whiteness, the ability of whiteness to change depending on the situation. So there have been so many times where, politically speaking, it was advantageous for white people to consider Latinos as white. There were times in history, and you're experiencing this now, where it was advantageous to consider some Asian people as white. And so, mimicking whatever is popular will tend to gain status for you. So whether you're mimicking another culture's fashion, whether you're mimicking another culture's style of education or the types of careers that they want, we oftentimes mimic other people in order to gain their sense of social status. We think that, okay, well, that person is rich, they dress this way, they act this way, I'm going to go ahead and act like them so I can achieve that type of lifestyle. And for most of history, whiteness has been the center of white beauty and social standards. And so they've always been able to sort of dictate how culture moves. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about the influence of Native American culture. So there are a lot of things that I think it's interesting to talk about whiteness as a blank canvas, because then we start to talk about how whiteness has taken things and has been influenced by other cultures. So even when you're talking about the influence of indigenous American culture, there are so many values and lessons and things that have really been like either taken or straight up stolen and co-opted by indigenous people. So whether it is the value of nature and land preservation, whether it is the importance of, land and sustainability or animal welfare, or, building community over the individual. When it comes to the influence of Black culture, there's everything from, food and music and art and dance and politics and medicine and science. There's also the artistic expression of music. There's artistic expression in revolution and political change, and the artistic expression in, genuine cultural exchange and code switching. And so there are so many of these different aspects that have also been, influencing and having a impact on how white people feel about their own identities. And then you're talking about the influence of international culture and how that has an impact on white identities, and the fact that internet culture, and traveling and tourism expose a lot of white people to the cultures that they've been missing out on, and the fact that, hey, white people actually aren't the center of the universe. And these things sort of served as a reminder to white people that, you aren't the center and that you don't control the narratives. And then you have this issue of what I want to talk about, which is white culture versus POC culture, because capitalist and white supremacist, our capitalist and white supremacist system has for such a long time suppressed POC culture for such a long time. And now we're sort of in this era where there is this modern renaissance of communities of color and their art and their, expression of identity and their expression of pride. And our expression, it captures certain aspects of the human experience that aren't actually captured in white culture and aren't represented in white culture. There are just some aspects of Black music or Asian food culture that you don't see in white culture. And I think the fact that we have been able to showcase something new, the fact that we have something unique within our own cultures, has been just this growing movement for us, for a lot of people of color who are experiencing what it means to be a person of color, what it means to have to unlearn a lot of these problematic ideologies, and what it means to learn to love yourself. The fight against so much of our cultures, whether you're talking about Black people and their, invention of rock and roll or hip hop, or Asian people and Asian culture, the pushback on a lot of that culture oftentimes stems from this fight of trying to be culturally dominant, trying to position yourselves as, oh, well, we are the voice of the youth. We are the ones who, the music should be represented of. We're the ones who should be represented in Asian movies and Asian music. All right, and we have our last section over here. Let me read some comments. Kundin says, yep, blank canvas attitude. There are many variations of it. The I am a spiritual being, not white attitude I referenced earlier is one variation. Oh, yeah. Like, there are so many white people who, again, it's like they're afraid. They are afraid to confront their own whiteness. And they'd rather do anything. They'd rather invent a religion than admit the fact that they're just white. It's mind-blowing. Kundin also says, the blank canvas attitude also results in so-called colorblind racism, or I don't see color, ironically racist deflection and derailment. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, that's why I think it's so interesting when it comes to people like Ollie London and Venus, because you really got to ask yourselves, like, what exactly, like, if this is how you feel about Korean identities and Asian identities, what do you feel about being white? Like, how do you actually feel about being a white person, a real whole-ass white person? Chris says, POC art and artists will only gain recognition when our work is directly applicable to whiteness and their experiences. Yeah, it's only until they are able to benefit from it. It's only when they are able to wear our costumes and wear our cultures that our culture starts to matter. Like, case in point, the newfound rise in Asian foodie cuisine, and the fact that so many Asian Americans grew up being, mocked and ridiculed for eating their ethnic foods, and yet now white chefs and white restaurants and white foodies, want to jump on the mukbang train. They want to jump on, oh, this is how you cook Korean food. This is how you make Asian food. Like, oh, so now it's cool, right? Fire says, read High on the Hog, the Netflix series gets to some, but just scratches the surface. What we think of what is American culture comes from the transatlantic enslavement more than I knew. Food, but also culture and hospitality. I want to watch that Netflix series. I actually have it on my list because I was like, oh my God, I've always wanted to watch a series that actually talks about that, because, I've always talked about how, like, food culture is very political. Food culture is very racialized. And especially when it comes to the United States, I mean, there is no, like white food in America is really just commercialized, mass-produced food. Because when you want to talk about actual American food, the recipes that define America, the recipes that define Southern cuisine, that's Black culture. That's Black community food. It's not white people food. And so I always wanted to watch something that sort of talks about the history of that and how, you know, how some of these classic dishes came into existence and how it become normalized, and how sometimes, or how oftentimes, a lot of the, originators of some of those cuisines have been erased, and instead we now get this perception that, like, fucking, Paula Deen is the queen of southern cuisine. Kunin says, yes, there's a growing anti-assimilation movement of us proudly reclaiming our culture and being fully ourselves. Isada said, rock and roll has been stuck for a while because it's not their original music and they only understand the superficial layers of it, not the essence of that music. Oh yeah. I mean, like, even if you're talking about right now, like, I'm loving the way that it's funny how there's those conversations about how rock stars are no longer rock stars and the new rock stars are hip hop artists and rappers. And just the fact that so much of, like, white music culture tends to be the process of chasing whatever it is that black people are doing and being, like, 5 years, it seems, behind on the cultural trends. But yeah, I mean, the process, the patterns are so predictable. It's so predictable when you see the whole, oh, a black artist comes out with something very different, let's go demonize it. Oh wait, now a white person's doing it. Okay, actually it's cool now. It's actually totally cool. That music is really fun. I really like it, actually. Yeah, it is definitely a thing. Shauna says, they have fully run out of shit to come up with on their own. And by on their own, I mean co-opting almost everything from Black and Latinx cultures. Carlene says, either our food is a product of war or slavery. And Monique says, yes, but also we are told that our food is disgusting until some white person decides they can make it better and sell it. And Shauna says, David Grohl just admitted to ripping off a Gap band drum rhythm. Yikes. Yeah, I mean, like, we can go for days about, the amount of white people who have built their careers off of, stealing from black musicians. All right. Now let's go ahead and move on to our final point of the day. We're ending at a pretty good time. And our final point is being versus acting like a person of color. So this is the part where I close things down, and this is some real shit now, right? Because the reality is, Ollie London, you will always be in racial cosplay. Always. Nothing, I'm sorry, but nothing beats the feeling of being real. I've had to live with this face. I've had to live with these eyes, and I can't change it. But I love the fact that this is me. As people of color, everything that we do is indigenous to us, and that's one of the coolest things. Because oftentimes when we have these conversations about representation, and when I talk to younger Asian Americans about, like, oh, what should I do? I want to be like a good inspiration, blah, 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 blah. One of the things I like to tell Asian people, or just people of color in general, who want to become, like, a leader or an icon within their community, is that you don't have to chase some sort of vision that somebody else set out for you in your community. Like, you can literally do whatever it is that you want. Like, you can be, like, if I wanted to become the first Filipino American to host a late night talk show on primetime TV, if I wanted that to be my goal, I could chase that goal, and if I get it, I could win that trophy for my people. And my people would, obviously there are some people who would probably hate me for it, or some Asian people who, crabs in a bucket, but it would be validated as a accomplishment by Filipino people. If you are a black mother from Virginia who wants to write the next great sci-fi series that will blow up bigger than Star Wars, you could chase that dream, and you could win that trophy and get that accomplishment, and bring that back to your people. And that will be something that you'll have on your list. Our perspectives and our experiences and our thoughts and our feelings and the complicated experiences and the journeys that we're going on, all of that matters so much, infinitely more than just our looks. Yeah, I mean, it's great to have Asian features. I don't know, I guess. I mean, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard for people of color to be like, yeah, it's great to look this way because we've had such a complicated, life dealing with the pros and cons of looking the way that we do. But yeah, I mean, as great and as beautiful as we look, and as interesting and diverse as our physical features might be, those things pale in comparison to actually being us. The actual experiences that we have, the stories, the history that we have, the pain and the glory is all part of it. The good and the bad is part of what it means to be an Asian person, or a Filipino person, or a Black person, or an Indigenous person, or a Latino person. And once we finally start to grow as a culture, and once we finally start to learn and truly appreciate the humanity in each other's experiences, then we'll start to realize that this is just racial cosplay. And at the end of the day, just because you dress like Goku doesn't mean you're going to have Goku powers. And the same way, just because you dress like an Asian person, just because you dress like a Black person, doesn't mean you're going to have the Asian or Black experience. And it's not the fucking same. And the way I see it, there is only one real true test. Well, not one true test, but, what I call the true test, which is, yeah, okay, sure, you put on some fox eye makeup, maybe you tan your skin and try to make yourself look like you're a Black woman. Okay, but do you really know our culture? Do you really know what it means to be us? Oh, you're Asian? Okay, what does a Vietnamese auntie's house smell like? Oh, you're Asian? What fruit do you normally see when you're going to your Asian friend's house and, they have the altar out in the front? Oh, you want to be a Black woman? Which characters did you grow up with when you were younger, and did you resonate with, and did you connect with as a young Black girl? Where do you buy your hair care products? Or, do you know how to eat fufu? Can you tell me how to cook rice with just your finger, with no measuring cup if you're really Asian? Are you Latino? Are you really a Latino? Can you walk into a Latino community and be seen and accepted and loved as one of them? You can. You can. Because part of the beauty of being us is that it's a process. We are all still learning about what it means to be us. So many of us are still learning what it means to be Asian or Filipino or Black. And it's a lifelong process, like how so many of us identified when we were in kindergarten or middle school or high school or college has evolved over time. And that process is beautiful in and of itself. And so, a lot of us are still continuing to share stories about our childhood, about, our traumatic experiences, our cultural discussions. We have a lot of discussions about pop culture and have debates about who's the best artist, who's the best K-pop artist, who's the best, blah, 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 blah. Some of these things are one of the, some of the benefits of what it means to actually be in the group, to be represented as the actual group itself. And for these white people who are cosplaying as us, who are Asian fishing, who are Black fishing, they can dress up and pretend to be us all they want. But they will never enjoy and experience the pain and the suffering of discovering your own culture. The pain of realizing what happened to your people. The ambition that is required once you realize that you have this chip on your shoulder about wanting to avenge things that have happened to your ancestors, and that this new chip on your shoulder is like a form of motivation that is inspiring you to keep pushing and keep going. And so just the feeling of being told that your culture was backwards and third world, and to hear that for the majority of your life, and then to go into your adulthood and to rediscover your history and to rediscover your culture and to find out that, wow, there were so many legends within our community. There were so many amazing people who come from my people. And to discover that rich history and to then be proud of it and to go through that is a transformative experience. To experience what it means to decolonize your own mind, it's beautiful, you know. And whether you want to call it immigrant mentality, whether you want to call it Black excellence, or whatever it is that you folks want to call it, this is a power. This power to feel like you are part of something bigger, to feel like you are part of this continuum, this story that is evolving and that is changing, and that for the very first time for a lot of communities, you know, us speaking out about our experiences and sharing our experiences is actually making a positive change. And you're starting to see a lot of us who are, you know, becoming and growing stronger together based off of our shared unity and our shared discussion of what it means to live as a real person of color. All right. That is it. Oh, we covered a lot of stuff. I'm sorry I missed a couple of slides. But let me see some comments right here. Pam says, why does that picture of racial cosplay remind me of Carol Brady with heavy eye makeup? Gabe says, good evening, by the way. What's going on, Gabe? Neela says, realizing that rap music can be political because of Eminem, yet rap had always had political and social commentary before him. Oh my God, don't even get me started on these white people who, oh my God, Eminem's the GOAT. Yeah, it's like when you make it seem as if like Eminem's the first person to like, oh man, he's the first person to like really tell a story. You'd have a message behind it. I'm like, do you? Okay, I mean, I guess you baby's first rap album. Michael Adams says, damn, I miss everything. People like Ollie see only surface level things, and there's far more complex things to being Korean than K-pop. It's like people who want to be Japanese, and the only thing they can claim to love is anime, ramen, pocky, and Tokyo. Japan is more than those shallow surface level things. Being Japanese is more than those things. 100%. Like, my best friend from high school, he is half Filipino and half Japanese. And one of the cool things is, you know, growing up with him, like his mom is Japanese, and, you know, I've met his grandparents. I've been to, you know, Japanese Abon festivals, and, you know, not living with him, but like, you know, being friends with him for so much of my life, I had experienced even just a sliver of, you know, Japanese culture, and just, you know, what regular Japanese families will eat, what it's like in his Japanese grandparents' house, and the way that they decorated things, and the way that they felt about music, and, you know, all these tiny little cues that have nothing to do with Tokyo or anime. And it's just, you know, I think one of the saddest things about some of these people who are Asian fishing and blackfishing is that, like, you know, they really do feel like they are living our lives. You know, they think that, oh, I got this face, and, you know, I'm black, I'm Asian. But it's like, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. You will never understand. You will not understand the joy of being, you know, an Asian person at the potluck, and, you know, hanging out with your friends and talking shit about your aunties. Like, you'll never understand what it means to be us. And you will always just continue to cling to this pop cultural perspective of what it means to be us. And that's fine. If you want to just limit yourself to that, you can go ahead. And that's what I think is the sort of irony about this whole thing, which is that these people try so hard to claim to be us, but if they only humbled themselves and just stepped out of themselves and just realized, you know what, I don't have to pretend to be Black or Asian to appreciate Black culture. I don't have to pretend to be Asian or Black to even enjoy that culture. You know, like, I don't have to be Black, but I can stand from the sidelines and cheer on Black folks and support Black businesses and eat food created by Black chefs. And I don't have to go anywhere near Blackfishing, you know? And it's just, again, I think it really boils down to white privilege. It really, really does boil down to the privilege of a lot of white folks who feel like culture is just this thing that they can try on, and that it's for everybody, and that I can just put on an Asian eye or, you know, a Black person's skin, and now I am them. Isada says, that was a great conversation. Thank you. You totally rock. Sierra says, good podcast today. Melissa, really enjoyed today's conversation. Venya says, I missed the first half. No worries. This will be up on Facebook if you want to go ahead and watch the whole thing. I'm also going to be uploading these on YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it there. I'm also going to try to cut up some clips from this discussion and post it, so that way you can go ahead and see the individual clips. Fire says, yes, if you are yourself and appreciated, you'll be welcomed, and give folks their space when they need it. Monique says, thank you. Good conversation today. Until next time. All right, folks. Well, that is all for today. I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to everybody. If you didn't comment recently, let me know, or drop a little comment, because I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to everybody, and I can only say goodbye to the people who commented recently. So let me go ahead and say goodbye to Kundan, to Monique, to Fire, to Carlene, to Venya, to Melissa, to Isada, to Sierra, Pam, Gabe, Michael, Neela, Damon, Daphne. Who else do we have in here? Shauna, Chris. I want to thank Chris. And I think that is it. All right, folks. Thank you all for joining Office Hours. It has been great. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everybody. I will see you next week. I'll see you throughout the week. And yeah, I'll post the topic next weekend. So, you know, who knows what we're going to talk about? I don't know yet. But yeah, have a wonderful, wonderful Monday, and I will see you all very soon. I love you, love you, love you. Bye, everybody.